We were in the mall, my wheelchair-bound son happily choosing a snack, when a woman stopped next to us, made a disgusted face, and said he looked dirty. Before I could react, she pulled out a bottle of alcohol gel and threw it at him. The chaos started right there. If there's one thing I've learned from being the mother of a wheelchair user, it's that the problem is never his disability, but the people around him. Most people get on with their lives without paying much attention, which I find a relief. Others are incredibly kind, often even exaggerating, as if I need help with absolutely everything, even when I'm just pushing the chair on a straight surface. And then there are those who look askance, who frown, as if my son is there just to disturb their existence. That woman was part of the latter group. The day began as normal. As usual, my son and I had our shopping routine. He loves looking in shop windows, even if he doesn't want to buy anything, and we always insist on stopping at the food court to choose something tasty. He likes the independence of deciding for himself what he's going to eat and interacting with the staff. Nothing indicated that this day would be any different, until she appeared. I don't know if she was there before and I just didn't notice, or if she arrived later. But suddenly there was a woman standing next to us, looking directly at my son. Her gaze wasn't one of curiosity or interest. It wasn't the usual look of someone who thinks a child is cute or wants to help in some way. It was disdain, almost a contained repulsion. Unfortunately, I've seen that look many times. Some people seem to believe that a child in a wheelchair is something to be avoided, as if it were something wrong, something that shouldn't be there. I made a point of ignoring it. I was used to this kind of thing, and I knew that the best response, most of the time, was to pretend that these people didn't exist. My son didn't seem to notice either. He was excited, deciding between hamburgers and nuggets, and the most important thing for me at that moment was to let him make his choice, without interruption. But, of course, this woman wasn't going to let up. He should be cleaner. The sentence came out of nowhere. Short, dry, full of judgment. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an innocent comment. It was a direct statement, as if she were announcing an obvious fact to everyone around her. It took my brain a second to process what I had just heard. My son, who until then had been smiling and pointing at the menu, looked at me without really understanding. He's 10 years old, smart enough to notice when something is strange, but still innocent enough not to fully understand people's meanness. The woman kept looking at him, as if deciding whether or not to continue talking. And she did. Children like that need more hygiene, don't they? They sit all day. Imagine that. She said it as if it were just a comment, as if she were talking about the weather or a product on the market. But the tone of her voice made it clear that it wasn't just an opinion. She believed it. She looked at my son as if he was dirty just for existing, as if the wheelchair was something contaminated, something that should be avoided. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'd heard a lot of absurdities in my life, but this definitely made the top 3. I was going to respond. I was going to put that woman in her place, make it clear that she had no right to speak like that. But before I could say anything, she did something even worse. She opened her handbag, took out a bottle of alcohol gel, poured some into her hand, and threw it on my son. Yes, she threw alcohol gel on him. It was quick, unexpected, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The first thing I heard was the sound of the liquid hitting the fabric of his shirt. My son froze, his eyes wide, not knowing what had just happened. The alcohol ran down his arm and dripped onto the back of the chair. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. My first instinct was to think that I was imagining things, that it couldn't have really happened. But then, the strong smell of alcohol hit my nose, and reality hit me like a punch in the stomach. She really had done it, and she didn't seem the least bit sorry. She just stood there, holding the bottle in her hand, with an expression like she thought she had done the world a favor. My son looked at me, confused. I saw the doubt in his eyes. He wanted to understand what had just happened. He wanted to know if he had done something wrong. And it was at that moment that anger took hold of me. That wasn't just another ignorable comment. It wasn't just another crooked look. She had crossed the line. And there, in the middle of that shopping mall, the confusion was about to begin. For a few seconds, I was frozen. My brain tried to keep up with what had just happened, as if it needed a second opinion of reality to confirm that this wasn't a delusion, but it was real. She really had poured alcohol gel on my son. The strong smell of the product was already taking over the air. The clear liquid ran down his t-shirt and dripped onto his arm and the back of his chair. My son, who until then had been smiling and excited about his request, now looked at me without understanding anything. He didn't say anything, but I saw doubt in his eyes. He wanted to know if he had done something wrong. It was at that moment that anger took hold of me. It wasn't just about the alcohol, it was about what it meant. That woman thought he was dirty for being in a wheelchair. She thought she had the right to correct the situation, to take an absurd attitude, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. The worst thing? She didn't seem sorry. She was still standing there, holding the bottle, with a cold look on her face. Not a word of apology, not a moment's hesitation. She really thought she was right. My head was boiling. Part of me wanted to scream, wanted to throw her to the ground, wanted to make her understand the gravity of what she had done. But I knew that if I lost control, somehow I would end up being the wrong one. I tried to take a deep breath. My son was the priority. I took a napkin from the tray and started to wipe the alcohol off his t-shirt. He was still quiet, and that hurt me more than anything. The woman, who had been quiet until then, finally opened her mouth. "It's just alcohol. It cleans germs. It doesn't hurt anyone." I stopped. I looked up at her. That was the last straw. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an attempt to make amends. It was justification. She really believed that she had done the right thing, as if the mere fact that my son was wheelchair-bound meant that he was less clean than any other child, as if I, as a mother, didn't take care of his hygiene. The blood rushed to my head. I looked around. Some people had seen the scene and were now watching discreetly, waiting to see what would happen. Some seemed shocked. Others were just curious. But no one intervened. Anger grew inside me, but I still tried to keep it under control. The restaurant attendant finally realized something was wrong and approached me, asking if there was a problem. Before I could answer, the woman stepped forward. "It's okay. I was just trying to help. I tried to help, as if I'd done you a favor." I felt my hand shaking with anger. My instinct told me to put that woman in her place, to shout, to make her understand how absurd and disgusting her attitude was. But I looked at my son. He was still standing there, waiting to see how I would react. This situation wasn't just about me or that woman. It was about what he would see as a response. So I took a deep breath and made a decision. "Do you think you did the right thing?" My voice came out firm, but controlled. She shrugged. "Well, yes. Children in wheelchairs. You know, they sit all day. They're not very mobile. It's only natural that they need a little more care." My vision blurred for a second. She was basically saying, to my face, that my son was less clean than other children simply because he was in a chair. "He's bathed every day." My voice came out colder than I expected. "And you just threw alcohol on him as if he were an object." She shook her head impatiently. "There's no need to exaggerate. It was just a bit of alcohol. It was just a little alcohol." The calmness with which she said it made me want to vomit. She really didn't see anything wrong with what she'd done. My son looked at me, trying to understand. He hadn't yet learned that there are people who will see him as less, simply because he is who he is. But now, thanks to this woman, he was beginning to learn. And I wasn't going to let that go unpunished. I turned to the attendant, who was still standing there, clearly not knowing what to do. "Can you call security, please?" He hesitated for a second, and then nodded, heading for the counter. The woman finally showed a reaction. "Security?" She laughed, humorlessly. "Because of some alcohol gel?" I looked at her without blinking. "Yes." Her expression changed. She didn't expect me to take any real action. I think, in her mind, I'd just stand there, furious, but doing nothing. But now, with security involved, the situation was no longer in her control. She crossed her arms, uncomfortable. For the first time, she looked nervous. The wait was short. In less than 2 minutes, a security guard appeared. He looked at me, then at the woman, and asked what was going on. And at that moment, I knew that the confusion had only just begun. The security guard didn't seem to be in any hurry. He looked at me, then at the woman, and finally at my son, who was still visibly uncomfortable. The scene said a lot on its own. The alcohol was still wetting the back of his chair, and the strong smell made it clear that this was no ordinary situation. The woman, on the other hand, was already beginning to show a slight nervousness. She didn't think it would come to this. The security guard, who looked to be in his mid-40s with obvious tiredness on his face, spoke to me first. What happened? I was still angry, but I made a point of controlling myself. I wasn't going to lose my temper. I explained briefly. I said that we were placing our order when this woman, out of the blue, started insinuating that my son wasn't clean enough, and, before I could react, she simply threw alcohol on him. The security guard arched his eyebrows in surprise. Then he turned to the woman. "Ma'am, is that true?" She immediately assumed the posture of a victim. "That's ridiculous. I just wanted to help." He was in the chair, and we all know that wheelchair users need to be more careful with their hygiene. "I didn't do anything. Nothing at all. I might have laughed if I hadn't been so angry." The security guard sighed, clearly used to this kind of person. "Regardless of your intention, you can't go around throwing alcohol at people." "But it was only a little." "It doesn't matter." His answer was firm, but calm. The woman, on the other hand, was starting to get worked up. The movement in the food court was already different. Some people stared discreetly, others clearly tried to pretend they weren't paying attention. But you could sense that the mood had changed. She noticed it, and she did what people like that do best. She turned the tables to play the victim. "That's absurd. I'm a good woman. I was just trying to help, and now you're treating me like a criminal." The security guard remained patient, but made it clear that she needed to get out of there. "Ma'am, I need you to come with us to resolve this situation." And that's when the real outburst began. She took a step back and crossed her arms, her posture completely defensive. "I'm not going anywhere. This is harassment. I have rights." The change in tone was abrupt. She was now speaking loudly, so that more people could hear. "I'm an American citizen. I know my rights. This is an attack on me." I had seen people like her before. People who know they've done something wrong, but try to reverse the situation by shouting louder than everyone else. The security guard didn't even flinch. "You can come on your own, or we can call the police." The word police finally had an effect. Her face turned red. Her gaze flicked between me, my son, and the security guard. She hadn't expected it to take such proportions. And for a brief moment, I saw the fear in her eyes, but pride wouldn't let her back down. She looked away, saw the people watching, and tried one last blow. "This is persecution. They're treating me like this because I'm a white woman." The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Even those who weren't paying attention now were. The security guard took a deep breath. He had already lost patience. "Last chance, ma'am." Her gaze moved quickly around the room. She was trapped. Then, without saying another word, she simply picked up her bag and marched out, leaving the food court as if she had just been wronged. The security guard followed her to make sure she actually left, while I stood there, still trying to absorb everything that had happened. I looked at my son. He was still quiet, watching everything. I knew he didn't fully understand the situation, but he understood enough to know that this wasn't normal. I ran my hand through his hair, trying to break the tension. "Are you hungry yet?" He gave a small smile and nodded positively. And it was at that moment that I realized that, as revolting as that situation had been, the most important thing was to make sure he didn't let it get to him. And I was going to make sure that he never felt less because of people like that. After that woman left the food court, the atmosphere gradually seemed to settle down. People went back to chatting, munching their snacks, going about their days as if nothing had happened. But for me, nothing seemed normal yet. My son was still there, sitting in his wheelchair, his shirt with a few damp stains from the alcohol she had thrown on it. He was looking at the restaurant counter, trying to pretend everything was fine, but I knew he wasn't completely comfortable. The security guard, after making sure that woman left the mall, came back to us. I could see on his face that this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with something like this. He asked if everything was all right, if we needed anything. "No, I just want to get on with our day," I replied. I didn't want to prolong it. I knew I could go further. I could file a complaint. I could even sue that woman for assault if I wanted to. But at the end of the day, none of that would erase what had happened, and I just wanted to move on. The security guard nodded understandingly and walked away. Finally, our order was ready. I took the tray, put the snacks on the table, and helped my son arrange everything at his height. He took the fry and kept twirling one between his fingers, without looking directly at me. He wanted to talk about what had happened, but he didn't know how. I didn't push him. I let him take the initiative himself. After a few minutes, he finally looked up. "Mom, why did that woman do that?" It was the question I knew would come, but which I still didn't know exactly how to answer. I thought of several ways to explain it, but in the end, the truth was simple. "Because she's a bad person," I answered bluntly. He was silent for a while, chewing on a potato, processing that answer. "But why? Did I do something?" That hurt. It hurt to see that. Even though he knew he hadn't done anything wrong, a part of him was still looking for an explanation where there wasn't one. "No, love, you didn't do anything. Some people just like to feel better than others and try to diminish those they think are different." He nodded slowly. He still didn't look completely convinced, but he accepted the answer. After that, we tried to get back to normal. We ate, talked about other things, avoided the subject, but inside, I knew it would stay on his mind for a long time. And in mine too. As I left the mall, I started to notice the people around me more. Before getting into the car, I looked around to see if that woman was still around. Even though I knew she had gone, there was still a nagging feeling of alertness inside me. And that was the worst thing, because as much as that moment had passed, I knew it wasn't the last. I knew that my son would still have to deal with people like her throughout his life, that there would be many more crooked looks, more absurd comments, more moments of doubt and injustice. And that was the hardest part of being a mother. It wasn't the physical work. It wasn't the doctor's appointments. It wasn't the daily adjustments. The hardest part was knowing that I couldn't protect him from everything. But at the same time, I knew I could teach him to be strong, to never lower his head to people like her, to understand that the problem was never him. It was always them. And I promised myself that he would never forget that. Even after that woman left the mall, the impact of what had happened was still there. My son seemed to be trying to move on, but I knew that, on some level, he was still thinking about it. His silence was different from normal. He ate, smiled at times, but was more restrained than usual. I tried to act as if nothing had happened too, because I wanted him to decide for himself how to deal with it. I didn't want to be the mother who pretends nothing happened, but I also didn't want to be the one who makes a fuss and turns his day into something even worse. Deep down, I knew that nothing I could say would erase what that woman had done. The drive home was uneventful, but inside my head, 1,000 things were happening. I knew I should be happy that I had managed to stay calm. I could have reacted differently. I could have shouted, pushed that woman, caused an even bigger commotion. But, in the end, none of that would change the fact that people like that will always exist. That wasn't the first time someone had looked down on my son, and it wouldn't be the last. Only this time, it was worse. This time, someone actually crossed a physical boundary. I've heard a lot of nonsense over the years. Mean comments, looks of pity disguised as sympathy, people who talk to him as if he's incapable of understanding a normal conversation. But this was different. That woman thought she had the right to touch him, and I knew that, for my son, that was the hardest part to understand. When we got home, I helped him out of the car and up the small ramp that led to the door. As soon as we got inside, he went straight to his room, saying he wanted to watch something on his tablet. I let him have his space. If he wanted to talk later, he would. I went into the kitchen and started preparing something for dinner, but my mind was still stuck on what had happened. I felt helpless, because I knew it wouldn't stop there. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't protect him from everything that was yet to come. He was going to grow up and face more situations like that, more crooked looks, more people who believe that wheelchair users are less hygienic, less capable, less something. The world is full of people who believe that being different is a problem, and I, as a mother, couldn't prevent him from coming across this type of person throughout his life. But I could teach him how to react. I could show him that he should never feel lesser because of it. I could teach him not to carry those words inside him. He didn't say much after that day, but over the weeks, I realized that his silence on the subject didn't mean that he had forgotten. A few weeks later, while we were at the market, he took a bottle of alcohol gel from the shelf, looked at me and asked, "Do you think that woman still thinks I'm dirty?" It was one of those moments when I felt my heart squeeze. I wanted to tell him to forget it. I wanted to tell him that woman didn't matter, but I knew that wasn't the right answer. So I just said, what she thinks doesn't matter. What matters is what you know about yourself. He thought for a moment, nodded, and put the alcohol gel back on the shelf. And we never touched on the subject again. But at that moment, I knew he understood. And for me, that was the most important thing. Have you ever met someone like that in your life? That kind of person who thinks they have the right to disrespect others and still feels entitled to be right? Tell me in the comments. I want to know your story. And if you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. Want to see more stories like this? Click on the card and come marathon. See you in the next video.